Dark tales for dark nights.
As soon as the phone stops ringing, I'll begin this affidavit. Lord, it's hot in here. Perhaps I should open a window. 13 rings. It has a sense of humor. I suppose that ought to be comforting. And somehow I'm not comforted. If it feels free to indulge in these teasing, tormenting little games, so much the worse for me. The summer is over now, but this room is like an oven. My shirt is already drenched, and this pen feels slippery in my hand. In a moment or two, the little drop of sweat that's been collecting above my right eyebrow is going to splash onto this page. Just the same, I'll keep the window closed. Outside, through the dusty panes of glass, I can see a boy in red spectacles sauntering toward the courthouse steps. Perhaps there's a telephone booth in back. A sense of humor. That's one quality I never noticed in it. I saw only a deadly seriousness and, it's clear, an intelligence that grew at terrifying speed, malevolent and inhuman. If it now feels itself safe enough to toy with me before doing whatever it intends, so much the worse for me. So much the worse, perhaps, for us all. I hope I'm wrong. Though my name is Jeremy, derived from Jeremiah, I'd hate to be a prophet in the wilderness. I'd much rather be a harmless crank. But I believe we're in for trouble. I'm a long way from the wilderness now, of course, though perhaps not far enough to save me. I'm writing this affidavit in room 2K of the Union Hotel, overlooking Main Street in Flemington, New Jersey, 20 miles south of Gilead. Directly across the street, hippies lounging on its steps, stands the county courthouse where Bruno Hauptmann was tried back in 1935. Did they ever find the body of that child? Hauptmann undoubtedly walked down those very steps, now lined with teenagers savoring their last week of summer vacation, where that boy in the red spectacles sits sucking on his cigarette. Did the killer once halt there, police and reporters around him, and contemplate his imminent execution? For several days now, I've been afraid to leave this room. I have perhaps been staring too often at that ordinary-looking boy on the steps. He sits there, every day. The red spectacles conceal his eyes. It's impossible to tell where he's looking. I know he's looking at me. But it would be foolish of me to waste time worrying about executions when I have these notes to transcribe. It won't take long, and then perhaps I'll sneak outside to mail them and leave New Jersey forever. I remain, despite all that's happened, an optimist. What was it my namesake said? "Thou art my hope in the day of evil." There is, surprisingly, some real wilderness left in New Jersey, assuming one wants to be a prophet. The hills to the west, spreading from the southern swamplands to the Delaware and beyond to Pennsylvania, provide shelter for deer, pheasant, even an occasional bear, and hide hamlets never visited by outsiders. Pockets of ignorance, some of them, citadels of ancient superstition utterly cut off from news of New York and the rest of the state. Religious communities where customs haven't changed appreciably since the days of their settlement a century or more ago. It seems incredible that villages so isolated can exist today on the very doorstep of the world's largest metropolis. Villages with nothing to offer the outsider, and hence never visited, except by the occasional hunter who stumbles on them unwittingly. Yet, as you speed down one of the state highways, consider how few of the cars slow down for the local roads. It is easy to pass the little towns without even a glance at the signs. And if there are no signs, And consider, too, how seldom the local traffic turns off onto the narrow roads that emerge without warning from the woods. And when those untraveled side roads lead into others, still deeper in wilderness, and when those, in turn, give way to dirt roads, deserted for weeks on end, it is not hard to see how tiny rural communities can exist less than an hour from major cities, virtually unaware of one another's existence. Television, of course, will link the two, unless, as is often the case, the elders of the community choose to see this distraction as the devil's tool and prescribe it. Telephones put these outcast settlements in touch with their neighbors, unless they choose to ignore their neighbors. And so, in the course of years, they are forgotten. New Yorkers were amazed when, in the winter of 1968, the Times discovered a religious community near New Providence that had existed in its present form since the late 1800s, less than 40 miles from Times Square. Agricultural work was performed entirely by hand. Women still wore long dresses with high collars, and town worship was held every evening. I, too, was amazed. I'd seldom traveled west of the Hudson and still thought of New Jersey as some dismal extension of the Newark slums, ruled by gangsters, foggy with swamp gases and industrial waste, a gray land that had surrendered to the city. Only later did I learn of the rural New Jersey, and of towns whose solitary general stores double as post offices, with one or two gas pumps standing in front. And later still, I learned of Baptist-town and Quaker-town, their old religions surviving unchanged, and of towns like Lebanon, Lansdowne, and West Portal, close to Route 22 and civilization, but heavy with secrets undreamt of by city folk. Mount Airy with its network of hidden caverns, and Mount Olive, bordering the infamous Bud Lake. Middle Valley, sheltered by dark cliffs, subject of the recent archaeological debate chronicled in Natural History, where a wanderer may still find peculiar relics of pagan worship and, some say, hear the chants that echo from the cliffs on certain nights. And towns with names like Zarephath and Gilead, forgotten communities of bearded men and black-robed women, walled hamlets too small or obscure for most maps of the state. This was the wilderness into which I traveled, weary of Manhattan's interminable din, and it was outside Gilead where, until the tragedies, I chose to make my home for 3 months. Among the silliest of literary conventions is The Town That Won't Talk, the Bavarian village where peasants turn away from tourists' queries about the castle and silently cross themselves. The New England harbor town where fishermen feign ignorance and cast furtive glances at the traveler. In actuality, I have found country people love to talk to the stranger, provided he shows a sincere interest in their anecdotes. Storekeepers will interrupt their activity at the cash register to tell you their theories on a recent murder. Farmers will readily spin tales of buried bones and of a haunted house down the road. Rural townspeople are not so reticent as the writers would have us believe. Gilead, isolated though it is behind its oak forests and ruined walls, is no exception. The inhabitants regard all outsiders with an initial suspicion, but let one demonstrate a respect for their traditional reserve and they will prove friendly enough. They don't favor modern fashions or flashy automobiles, but they can hardly be described as hostile, although that was my original impression. When asked about the terrible events at Poroth Farm, they will prove more than willing to talk. They will tell you of bad crops and polluted well water, of emotional depression leading to a fatal argument. In short, they will describe a conventional rural murder, and will even volunteer their opinions on the killer's present whereabouts. But you will learn almost nothing from them, or almost nothing that is true. They don't know what really happened. I do. I was there. I come to spend the summer with Sarr Poroth and his wife. I needed a place where I could do a lot of reading without distraction, and Poroth's Farm, secluded as it was even from the village of Gilead 2 miles down the dirt road, appeared the perfect spot for my studies. I had seen the Poroth's advertisement in the Hunterdon County Democrat on a trip west through Princeton last spring. They advertised for a summer or long-term tenant to live in one of the outbuildings behind the farmhouse. As I soon learned, the building was a long, low cinder block affair, unpleasantly suggestive of army barracks, but clean, functional, and cool in the sun. By the start of summer, ivy sprouted from the walls and disguised the ugly gray brick. Originally intended to house chickens, it had in fact remained empty for several years until the farm's original owner, a Mr. Baber, sold out last fall to the Poroths, who immediately saw that with the installation of dividing walls, linoleum floors, and other improvements, the building might serve as a source of income. I was to be their first tenant. The Poroths, Sarr and Deborah, were in their early 30s, only slightly older than I, although anyone who met them might have believed the age difference to be greater. Their relative solemnity and the drabness of their clothing added years to their appearance, and so did their hairstyles. Deborah, though possessing a beautiful length of black hair, wound it all in a tight bun behind her neck, pulling the hair back from her face with a severity which looked almost painful. And Sarr maintained a thin fringe of black beard that circled from ears to chin in the manner of the Pennsylvania Dutch, who leave their hair shaggy but refuse to grow mustaches, lest they resemble the military class they've traditionally despised. Both man and wife were hard-working, grave of expression, and pale despite the time spent laboring in the sun, a pallor accentuated by the inky blackness of their hair. I imagine this unhealthy aspect was due, in part, to the considerable amount of inbreeding that went on in the area, the Poroths themselves being, I believe, third cousins. On first meeting, one might have taken them for brother and sister, 2 gravely devout children, aged in the wilderness. And yet there was a difference between them, and a difference that set them both in contrast to others of their sect. The Poroths were, as far as I could determine, members of a tiny Mennonitic order outwardly related to the Amish, though doctrinal differences were apparently rather profound. It was this order that made up the large part of the community known as Gilead. I sometimes think the only reason they allowed an infidel like me to live on their property, for my religion was among the first things they inquired about, was because of my name. Sarr was very partial to Jeremiah, and the motto of their order was, "Stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein." 6:16. Having been raised in no particular religion except a universal skepticism, I began the summer with a hesitancy to bring up the topic in conversation, and so I learned comparatively little about the Poroths' beliefs. Only toward the end of my stay did I begin to thumb through the Bible in odd moments and take to quoting Jeremiads. That was, I suppose, Sarr's influence. I was able to learn, nonetheless, that for all their conservative aura, the Poroths were considered, in effect, young liberals by most of Gilead. Sarr had a bachelor's degree in religious studies from Rutgers, and Deborah had attended a nearby community college for 2 years, unusual for women of the sect. 2, they had only recently taken to farming, having spent the first year of their marriage near New Brunswick, where Sarr had hoped to find a teaching position, and when the job situation proved hopeless, had worked as a sort of handyman carpenter. While most inhabitants of Gilead had never left the farm, the Poroths were coming to it late. Their families had been merchants for several generations, and so were relatively inexperienced. The inexperience showed. The farm comprised some 90 acres, but most of that was forest, or fields of weeds too thick and high to walk through. Across the backyard, close to my rooms, ran a small, nameless stream nearly choked with green scum. A large cornfield to the north lay fallow, but Sarr was planning to seed it this year, using borrowed equipment. His wife spent much of her time indoors, for though she maintained a small vegetable garden, she preferred keeping house and looking after the Poroths' great love, their 7 cats. As if to symbolize their broad-mindedness, the Poroths owned a television set, very rare in Gilead. In light of what was to come, however, it is unfortunate they lacked a telephone. Apparently, the set had been received as a wedding present from Deborah's parents, but the monthly expense of a telephone was simply too great. Otherwise, though, the little farmhouse was modern in that it had a working bathroom and gas heat. That they had advertised in the local newspaper was considered scandalous by some of the order's more orthodox members, and indeed a mere subscription to that innocuous weekly had at one time been regarded as a breach of religious conduct. Though outwardly similar, both of them tall and pale, the Poroths were actually so different as to embody the maxim that opposites attract. It was that carefully nurtured reserve that deceived one at first meeting. For in truth, Deborah was far more talkative, friendly, and energetic than her husband. Sarr was moody, distant, silent most of the time, with a voice so low that one had trouble following him in conversation. Sitting as stonily as one of his cats, barely moving, seldom speaking, remote and inscrutable. He tended to frighten visitors to the farm until they learned that he was not really sitting in judgment on them. His reserve was not born of surliness, but of shyness. Where Sarr was cat-like, his wife hid, beneath the formality of her order, the bubbly personality of a kitten. Given the smallest encouragement, say a family visit, she would plunge into animated conversation, gesticulating, laughing easily, hugging whatever cat was nearby or shouting to guests across the room. When drinking, for both of them enjoyed liquor, and curiously it was not forbidden by their faith, their innate differences were magnified. Deborah would forget the restraints placed upon women in the order and would eventually dominate the conversation, while her husband would seem to grow increasingly withdrawn and morose. Women in the region tended to be submissive to the men, and certainly the important decisions in the Poroths' lives were made by Sarr. Yet, I really cannot say who was the stronger of the two. Only once did I ever see them quarrel. Perhaps the best way to tell it is by setting down portions of the journal I kept this summer. Not every entry, of course, mere excerpts, just enough to make this affidavit comprehensible to anyone unfamiliar with the incidents at Poroth Farm. The journal was the only writing I did all summer. My primary reason for keeping it was to record the books I'd read each day, as well as to examine my reactions to relative solitude over an extended period. All the rest of my energies, as you will no doubt gather from the notes below, were spent reading in preparation for a course I plan to teach at Trenton State this fall. Or planned, I should say, because I don't expect to be anywhere around here come fall. Where will I be? Perhaps that depends on what's beneath those rose-tinted spectacles. The course was to cover the Gothic tradition from Shakespeare to Faulkner, from Hamlet to Absalom, and why not view the former as Gothic, with its ghost on the battlements and concern for lost inheritance? To make the move to Gilead, I'd rented a car for a few days and had stuffed it full of books, only a few of which I ever got to read. But then, I couldn't have known how pleasant things were at the beginning. June 4. Unpacking day. Spent all morning putting up screens, and a good thing I did. Night now, and a million moths tapping at the windows. One of them as big as a small bird. White. Largest I've ever seen. What kind of caterpillar must it have been? I hope the damned things don't push through the screens. Had to kill literally hundreds of spiders before moving my stuff in. The Poroths supposedly renovated this building only a couple of months ago, and already it's infested. Arachnida. Hate the bastards. Why? We'll take that one up with Sigmund someday. Daydreams of revenge of the spiders, writhing body covered with a frenzy of hairy brown legs. Egad, man, that face! That bloody, torn face! And the missing eyes! It looks like... No! Jeremy! Killing spiders is supposed to bring bad luck. Insidious Sierra Club propaganda masquerading as folk myth? But can't sleep if there's anything crawling around, so it's swat or stamp on whatever I can. Supper with the Poroths. Began to eat, then heard Sarr saying grace. Apologies, but things like that don't embarrass me as much as they used to. Is that because I'm nearing 30? Chatted about crops, insects, humidity. Very damp area. Band of purplish mildew already around bottoms of walls out here. Sarr told of plans to someday build a larger house when Deborah has a baby, 3 or 4 years from now. Intends to build it out of stone. Then he shut up, and I had to keep the conversation going. Hate eating in silence. Animal sounds of mastication, bubbling stomachs. Deborah joked about cats being her surrogate children, all 7 of them hanging around my legs, rubbing against ankles. My nose began running and my eyes itched. Goddamned allergy. Must remember to start treatments this fall when I get to Trenton. Deborah sympathetic, Sarr merely watchful. She told me my eyes were bloodshot, offered antihistamine. Told them I was glad they at least believe in modern medicine. I'd been afraid she'd offer herbs or mud or something. Sarr said some of the locals still use snake oil. Asked him how snakes were killed, quoting a line from Vedic. The oil of the serpents I've pinched to death will be a pretty present. We discussed wisdom of pinching snakes. Apparently there's a copperhead out back near the brook. The meal was good, lamb and noodles. Not bad for $20 a week, since I detest cooking. Spice cake for dessert, homemade, of course. Deborah's a good cook. Handsome woman, too. Still light when I left their kitchen. Fireflies already on the lawn. I've never seen so many. Knelt and watched them a while, listening to the crickets. Think I'll like it here. Took nearly an hour to arrange my books the way I wanted them. Alphabetical order by authors? No, chronological. But anthologies mess that system up, so back to authors. Why am I so neurotic about my books? Anyway, they look nice there on the shelves. Sat up tonight finishing The Mysteries of Udolpho. Figure it's best to get the long ones out of the way first. Radcliffe has unfortunate penchant for explaining away all her ghosts and apparitions. Really a mistake and a bore. All in all, not exactly the most fascinating reading, though a good study in romanticism. Montoni, the typical Byronic hero/villain. But can't demand students read Udolpho. Too long. In fact, had to keep reminding myself to slow down, have patience with the book. Tried to put myself in frame of mind of 1794 reader with plenty of time on his hands. It works, too. I do have plenty of time out here, and already I can feel myself beginning to unwind. What New York does to people. It's almost 2 a.m. now, and I'm about ready to turn in. Too bad there's no bathroom in this building. I hate pissing outside at night. God knows what's crawling up your ankles. But it's hardly worth stumbling through the darkness to the farmhouse and maybe waking up Sarr and Deborah. The nights out here are really pitch black. Felt vulnerable standing there against the night. But what made me even uneasier was the view I got of this building. The lamp on the desk casts the only light for miles, and as I stood outside looking into this room, I could see dozens of flying shapes making right for the screens. When you're inside here, it's as if you're in a display case. The whole night can see you, but all you can see is darkness. I wish this room didn't have windows on 3 of the walls, though that does let in the breeze. And I wish the woods weren't so close to the windows by the bed. I suppose privacy is what I wanted, but feel a little unprotected out here. Those moths are still batting themselves against the screens, but as far as I can see, the only things that have gotten in are a few gnats flying around this lamp. The crickets sound good. Sure don't hear them in the city. Frogs are croaking in the brook. My nose is only now beginning to clear up. Those goddamned cats. I'll walk to town tomorrow. Must remember to buy some contact. Even if the cats are all outside during the day, that farmhouse is full of their scent. But I don't expect to be spending too much time inside the house anyway. This allergy will keep me away from the TV and out here with the books. Just saw an unpleasantly large spider scurry across the floor near the foot of my bed. Vanished behind the footlocker. Must remember to buy some insect spray. June 11. Hot today, but at night comes a chill. The dampness of this place seems to magnify temperature. Sat outside most of the day finishing the Maturin book, Melmoth the Wanderer, and feeling vaguely guilty each time I heard Sarr or Deborah working out there in the field. Well, I've paid for my reading time, so I guess I'm entitled to enjoy it. Though some of these old Gothics are a bit hard to enjoy. The trouble with Melmoth is that it wants you to hate. You're especially supposed to hate the Catholics. No doubt its picture of the Inquisition is accurate, but all a book like this can do is put you in an unconstructive rage. Its cast of vicious characters have been dead for centuries, and there's no way to punish them. Still, it's a nice, cynical book for those who like atrocity scenes. Starving prisoners forced to eat their girlfriends, etc. And narratives within narratives within narratives within narratives. I may assign some sections to my class. Just before dinner, in need of a break, read a story by Arthur Machen. Born a century ago in rural Wales, though not sure exactly where the story's set. Old house in the hills, dark woods with secret paths and hidden streams. God, what an experience. I was a little confused by the framing device and all its high-flown talk of cosmic evil, but the sections from the young girl's notebook were staggering. That air of paganism, the malevolent little faces peeping from the shadows, and those rites she can't dare talk about. It's called The White People, and it must be the most persuasive horror tale ever written. Afterward, strolling toward the farmhouse, the Poroths had already gone in to get dinner ready, I was moved to climb the old tree in the side yard and stood upright on a great heavy branch near the middle, making strange gestures and faces that no one could see. Can't say exactly what it was I did, or why. It was getting dark, fireflies below me and a mist rising off the field. I must have looked like a madman's shadow as I made signs to the woods and the moon. Lamb tonight, and damned good. I may find myself getting fat. Offered again to wash the dishes, but apparently Deborah feels that later. So, talked a while with Sarr about his cats, the usual subject of conversation, especially because, now that summer's coming, they're bringing in dead things every night. Field mice, moles, shrews, birds, even a little garter snake. They don't eat them, just lay them out on the porch for the Poroths to see. Sort of an offering, I guess. Sarr tosses the bodies in the garbage can, which, as a result, smells indescribably foul. Deborah wants to put bells around their necks. She hates mice, but feels sorry for the birds. When she finished the dishes, she and Sarr sat down to watch one of their god-awful TV programs, so I came out here to read. Spent the usual 10 minutes going over this room, spray can in hand, looking for spiders to kill. Found a couple of little ones, then spent some time spraying bugs that were hanging on the screens, hoping to get in. Watched a lot of long-legged things curl up and die. Tended not to kill the moths, unless they were making too much of a racket banging against the screen. I can tolerate them, okay, but it's the fireflies I really like. I always feel a little sorry when I kill one by mistake and see it hold that cold glow too long. That's how you know they're dead. The dead ones don't wink. They just keep their light on till it fades away. The insecticide I'm using is made right here in New Jersey by the Ortho Chemical Company. The label on the can says, "Warning for outdoor use only." That's why I bought it. Figured it's the most powerful brand available. Sat in bed reading Algernon Blackwood's witch/cat story, Ancient Sorceries. Nowhere near as good as Mackin, or his own tale, The Willows, and it made me think of those 7 cats. The Poroths have around a dozen names for each of them, which seems a little ridiculous since the creatures barely respond even to one. Sasha, for example, the orange male, is also known as Butch, which comes from bouche, mouth, and that's short for Eddie LaBouche, so he's also called Ed or Eddie, which in turn comes from some friend's mispronunciation of the cat's original name, Itty, short for Itty Bitty Kitty, as he was quite small when they got him. And Zoe, the cutest of the kittens, is also called Bozo and Bizbo. Let's see, how many others can I remember? I'm just learning to tell some of them apart. Felix, or Flixie, was originally called Paleface, and Phaedra, his mother, is sometimes known as Fuddy, short for Fuddy Duddy. Come to think of it, the only cat that hasn't got multiple names is Boada, Sarr's cat. All the others were acquired after he married Deborah, but Boada was his pet years before. She's the oldest of the cats and the meanest. Fat and sleek, with fine gray fur, darker than silver gray, lighter than charcoal. She's the only cat that's ever bitten anyone, Deborah, as well as friends of the Poroths, and after seeing the way she snarls at the other cats when they get in her way, I decided to keep my distance. Fortunately, she's scared of me and retreats whenever I approach. I think being spayed is what's messed her up and given her an evil disposition. Sounds are drifting from the farmhouse. I can vaguely make out a psalm of some kind. It's late, past 11, and I guess the Poroths have turned off the TV and are singing their evening devotions. And now, all is silence. They've gone to bed. I'm not very tired yet, so I guess I'll stay up a while and read some. Something odd just happened. I've never heard anything like it. While writing for the past half hour, I've been aware, if half-consciously, of the crickets. Their regular chirping can be pretty soothing, like the sound of a well-tuned machine. But just a few seconds ago, they seemed to miss a beat. They'd been singing along steadily ever since the moon came up, and all of a sudden they just stopped for a beat. And then they began again, only they were out of rhythm for a moment or two, as if a hand had jarred the record or there'd been some kind of momentary break in the natural flow. They sound normal enough now, though. Think I'll go back to Otranto and let that put me to sleep. It may be the foundation of the English Gothics, but I can't imagine anyone actually reading it for pleasure. I wonder how many pages I'll be able to get through before I drop off. June 12. Slept late this morning, and then, disinclined to read Walpole on such a sunny day, took a walk. Followed the little brook that runs past my building. There's still a lot of that greenish scum clogging one part of it, and if we don't have some rain soon, I expect it'll get worse. But the water clears up considerably when it runs past the cornfield and through the woods. Passed Sarr out in the field. He yelled to watch out for the copperhead, which put a pall on my enthusiasm for exploration. But as it happened, I never ran into any snakes, and have a fair idea I'd survive even if bitten. Walked around half a mile into the woods, branches snapping in my face. made an effort to avoid walking into the little yellow caterpillars that hang from every tree. At one point, I had to get my feet wet because the trail that runs alongside the brook disappeared and the undergrowth was thick. Ducked under a low arch made by decaying branches and vines, my sneakers sloshing in the water. Found that as the brook runs west, it forms a small circular pool with banks of wet sand surrounded by tall oaks, their roots thrust into the water. Lots of animal tracks in the sand. Deer, I believe, and what may be a fox, or perhaps some farmer's dog. Obviously a watering place. Waded into the center of the pool. It only came up a little past my ankles, but didn't stand there long because it started looking like rain. The weather remained nasty all day, but no rain has come yet. Cloudy now, though. Can't see any stars. Finished Otranto, began The Monk. So far, so good. Rather dirty, really. Not for readers today, of course, but I can imagine the sensation it must have caused back at the end of the 18th century. Had a good time at dinner tonight, since Sarr had walked into town and brought back some wine. Medical note: I seem to be less allergic to cats when mildly intoxicated. We sat around the kitchen afterward playing poker for matchsticks. Very sinful indulgence, I gather. Sarr and Deborah told me, quite seriously, that they'd have to say some extra prayers tonight by way of apology to the Lord. Theological considerations aside, though, we all had a good time, and Deborah managed to clean us both out. Women's intuition, she says. I'm sure she must have it. She's the type. Enjoy being around her, and not always so happy to trek back outside to this room, through the high grass, the night dew, the things in the soil. I've got to remember, though, that they're a couple. I'm the single one, and I mustn't intrude too long. So left them tonight at 11, or actually a little after that, since their clock is slightly out of kilter. They have this huge grandfather-type clock, a wedding present from Sarr's parents, that has supposedly been keeping perfect time for a century or more. You can hear its ticking all over the house when everything else is still. Deborah said that last night, just as they were going to bed, the clock seemed to slow down a little, then gave a couple of faster beats and started in as before. Sarr examined it. He's pretty good with mechanical things, but said he saw nothing wrong. Guess everything's got to wear out a bit after years and years. Back to the monk. May Brother Ambrosio bring me pleasant dreams. June 13. Read a little in the morning, loafed during the afternoon. At 4:30 watched The Thief of Baghdad, ruined on TV and portions omitted, but still a great film. Deborah puttered around the kitchen, and Sarr spent most of the day outside. Before dinner, I came back out here with scissors and cut away a lot of ivy that's tried to grow through the windows of this building. The little shoots fasten onto the screens and really cling. Beef with rice tonight and apple pie for dessert. Great. I stayed inside the house after dinner to watch the late news with the Poroths. The announcer mentioned that today was Friday the 13th, and I nearly gasped. I'd known on some dim automatic level that it was the 13th, if only from keeping this journal, but I hadn't had the faintest idea it was Friday. That's how much I've lost track of time out here. Day drifts into day, and everyone but Sunday seems completely interchangeable. Not a bad feeling, really, though at certain moments this isolation makes me feel somewhat adrift. I've been so used to living by the clock and the calendar. We tried to figure out if anything unlucky happened to any of us today. About the only incident we could come up with was Sarr's getting bitten by some animal a cat had left on the porch. The cats had been sitting by the front door waiting to be let in for their dinner, and when Sarr came in from the field, he was greeted with the usual assortment of dead mice and moles. As he always did, he began gingerly picking the bodies up by the tails and tossing them into the garbage can, meanwhile scolding the cats for being such natural-born killers. There was one body, he told us, that looked different from the others, rather like a large shrew, only the mouth was somehow askew, almost as if it were vertical instead of horizontal, with a row of little yellow teeth exposed. He figured that, whatever it was, the cats had pretty well mauled it, which probably accounted for its unusual appearance. It was quite tattered and bloody by this time. In any case, he had bent down to pick it up, and the thing had twisted itself and bitten him on the thumb. Apparently, it had just been feigning death, like an opossum, because as soon as he yelled and dropped it, the thing sped off into the grass, with Boada and the rest in hot pursuit. Deborah had been afraid of rabies, always a real danger around here, rare though it is, but fortunately the bite hadn't even pierced Sarr's skin. Just a nip, really. Hardly a Friday the 13th tragedy. Lying in bed now, listening to sounds in the woods. The trees come really close to my windows in the back, and there's always some kind of sound coming from the underbrush in addition to the tapping at the screens. A million creatures out there, after all. Most of them insects and spiders, a colony of frogs in the swampy part of the woods, and perhaps even skunks and raccoons. Depending on your mood, you can either ignore the sounds and just go to sleep, or, as I'm doing now, remain awake, listening to them. When I lie here, thinking about what's out there, I feel more protected with the light off. So I think I'll put away this writing. June 15. Something really weird happened today. I still keep trying to figure it out. Sarr and Deborah were gone almost all day. Sunday worship is, I assume, the center of their religious activity. They walked into Gilead early in the morning and didn't return until after 4. They'd left, in fact, before I woke up. Last night they'd asked me if I'd like to come along, but I got the impression they were inviting me mainly to be polite, so I declined. I wouldn't want to make them uncomfortable during their services, but perhaps someday I'll accompany them anyway, since I'm curious to see a fundamentalist church in action. I was left to share the farm with the Poroth's 7 cats and the 4 hens they'd bought last week. From my window, I could see Boada and Phaedra chasing after something near the barn. Lately, they've taken to stalking grasshoppers. As I do every morning, I went into the farmhouse kitchen and made myself some breakfast, leafing through one of the Poroth's religious magazines, and then returned to my rooms out back for some serious reading. I'd picked up Dracula again, which I'd started yesterday, but the soppy Victorian sentimentality began to annoy me. The book had begun so well, on such a frightening note. Jonathan Harker trapped in that Carpathian castle, inevitably the prey of its terrible owner, that when Stoker switched the locale to England and his main characters to women, he simply couldn't sustain that initial tension. With the Poroths gone, I felt a little lonely and bored, something I hadn't felt out here before. Though I'd brought cartons of books to entertain me, I felt restless and wished I owned a car. I'd have gone for a drive. Surely there must be plenty of places worth exploring. As things stood, though, I had nothing to do except watch television or take a walk. So I followed the stream again into the woods and eventually came to the circular pool. There were some new animal tracks in the wet sand, and ringed by oaks, the place was very beautiful. But still, I felt bored. Again, I waded to the center of the pool and looked up at the sky through the trees. Feeling myself alone, I began to make some of the odd signs with face and hands that I'd made that evening in the tree, but I felt that these movements had been unaccountably robbed of their power. Standing there, up to my ankles in water, I felt foolish. Worse than that, upon leaving the place, I found a red-brown leech clinging to my right ankle. It wasn't large, and I was able to scrape it off with a stone, but it left me with a little round bite that oozed blood, and a feeling of, how shall I put it, physical helplessness. I felt that the woods had somehow become hostile to me, and, more important, would forever remain hostile. Something had passed. I followed the stream back to the farm, and there I found Boada, lying on her side near some rocks along the bank. Her legs were stretched out as if she were running, and her eyes were wide and astonished-looking. Flies were crawling over them. She couldn't have been dead for long, since I'd seen her only a few hours before, but she was already stiff. There was foam around her jaws. I couldn't tell what happened to her until I turned her over with a stick and saw, on the side that had lain against the ground, a gaping red hole that opened like some new orifice. The skin around it was folded back in little triangular flaps, exposing the pink flesh beneath. I backed off in disgust, but I could see, even from several feet away, that the hole had been made from the inside. I can't say that I was very upset at Boada's death, because I'd always hated her. What did upset me, though, was the manner of it. I can't figure out what could have done that to her. I vaguely remember reading about a kind of slug that, when eaten by a bird, will bore its way out through the bird's stomach, but I'd never heard of something like this happening with a cat. And even more peculiar, how could... Well, anyway, I saw the body and thought, good riddance, but I didn't know what to do with it. Looking back, of course, I wish I'd buried it right there, but I didn't want to go near it again. I considered walking into town and trying to find the Poroths because I knew their cats were like children to them, even Boada, and that they'd want to know right away. But I really didn't feel like running around Gilead asking strange people where the Poroths were, or, worse yet, stumbling into some forbidden-looking church in the middle of a ceremony. Finally, I made up my mind to simply leave the body there and pretend I'd never seen it. Let Sarr discover it himself. I didn't want to have to tell him when he got home that his longtime pet had been killed. I prefer to avoid unpleasantness. Besides, I felt strangely guilty, the way one often does at someone else's misfortune. So I spent the rest of the afternoon reading in my room, slogging through the Stoker. I wasn't in the best mood to concentrate. Sarr and Deborah got back after 4. They shouted hello and went into the house. When Deborah called me for dinner, they still hadn't come outside. When I entered the kitchen, all the cats were inside having their evening meal. All except Boada. And Sarr asked me if I'd seen her during the day. I lied and said I hadn't. Deborah suggested that occasionally Boada ignored the supper call because, unlike the other cats, she sometimes ate what she killed. "Maybe she's just full," said Deborah, and laughed. That rattled me a bit, but I had to stick to my lie. Sarr seemed more concerned, and when he told Deborah he intended to search for the animal after dinner, it would still be light, I readily offered my help. I figured I could lead him to the spot where the body lay. And then, in the middle of our dinner, came that scratching at the door. Sarr got up and opened it. Boada walked in. Now, I know she was dead. She was stiff dead. That wound in her side had been unmistakable, and now it was only a reddish swelling, hairless. Luckily, the Poroths didn't notice my shock. They were busy fussing over her, seeing what was wrong. "Look, she's hurt herself," said Deborah. "She's bumped into something." The animal didn't walk well, and there was a clumsiness in the way she held herself. When Sarr put her down after examining the swelling, she slipped when she tried to walk away. The Poroths decided that she must have run into a jagged rock or some other object and had badly bruised herself. They believe her lack of coordination is due to the shock, or perhaps to a pinching of the nerves. It sounds logical enough. Sarr told me, before I came out here for the night, that if she's worse tomorrow, he'll take her to the local vet, even though he'll have trouble paying for treatment. I immediately offered to lend him money or even pay for the visit myself, because I desperately want to hear a doctor's opinion. My own conclusion is really not that different from theirs. I tend to think now that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong in assuming the cat was dead. I'm no scientist. Maybe what I mistook for rigor mortis was some kind of fit. Maybe she really did run into something sharp and then went into some kind of shock whose effect hasn't yet worn off. It's possible, I guess. But I could swear that hole came from inside her. I couldn't continue dinner and told the Poroths my stomach hurt, which was partly true. We all watched Boada stumble around the kitchen floor, ignoring the food Deborah put before her as if it weren't there. Her movements were stiff, tentative, like a newborn animal still unsure how to move its muscles. I suspect that's the result of her fit. When I left the house tonight, a little while ago, she was huddled in the corner, staring at me. Deborah was crooning over her, but the cat was staring at me. Killed a monster of a spider behind my suitcase tonight. That ortho bug spray really does a job. When Sarr was in here a few days ago, he said the room smelled of spray, but I guess my allergy's too bad for me to smell it. I enjoy watching the zoo outside my screens. Put my face close and stare at the bugs eye to eye. Zap the ones whose faces I don't like. Tried to read more of the Stoker, but one thing keeps bothering me. The way that cat stared at me. Deborah was brushing its back, Sarr fiddling with his pipe, and that cat just stared at me and never blinked. I stared back, said, "Hey, Sarr, look at Boada. That damn cat's not blinking." And just as he looked up, it blinked, heavily. Hope we can go to the vet tomorrow, because I want to ask him whether cats can impale themselves on a rock or a stick, and if such an accident might cause a fit of some kind that would make them rigid. Cold night. Sheets are damp and the blanket itches. Wind from the woods. Ought to feel good in the summer, but it doesn't feel like summer. That damned cat didn't blink till I mentioned it. Almost as if it understood me. June 17. Swelling on her sides all healed now, hair growing back over it. She walks fine, has a great appetite, shows affection to the Poroths. Sarr says her recovery demonstrates how the Lord watches over animals, affirms his faith. Says if he'd taken her to a vet, he'd just have been throwing away money. Read some Le Fano, green tea about the phantom monkey with eyes that glow, and The Familiar about the little staring man who drives the hero mad. Not the smartest choices right now, the way I feel, because for all the time that fat gray cat purrs over the Poroths, it just stares at me and snarls. I suppose the accident may have addled its brain a bit. I mean, if spaying can change a cat's personality, certainly goring on a rock might. Spent a lot of time in the sun today. The flies made it pretty hard to concentrate on the stories, but figured I'd get a suntan. I probably have a good tan now. Hard to tell because the mirror in here is small and the light dim. But suddenly it occurs to me that I'm not going to be seeing anyone for a long time anyway, except the Poroths, so what the hell do I care how I look? Can hear them singing their nightly prayers now. A rather comforting sound, I must admit, even if I can't share the sentiments. Petting Felix today, my favorite of the cats, real charm, came away with a tick on my arm, which I didn't discover till taking a shower before dinner. As a result, I can still feel imaginary ticks crawling up and down my back. Damned cat. June 21. Coming along well with the Victorian stuff. Zipped through The Uninhabited House and Monsieur Maurice, both very literate, sophisticated. Deep into the terrible suffering of the Amber Witch, poor priest and daughter near starvation, when Deborah called me in for dinner. Roast beef with salad made from garden lettuce. Quite good. And Deborah was wearing one of the few sleeveless dresses I've seen on her. So, she has a body after all. A rainy night. Hung around the house for a while reading in their living room while Sarr whittled and Deborah crocheted, like the way Victorians used to spend their evenings, all sitting around together, everyone doing their thing. Rain sounded better from in there than it does out here, where it's not so cozy. At 11, we turned on the news, cats purring around us. Sarr with Zoe on his lap, Deborah petting Phaedra, me sniffling. Halfway through the broadcast, I pointed to Boada, curled up at my feet, and said, "Look at her. You'd think she was watching the news with us." Deborah laughed and leaned over to scratch Boada behind the ears. As she did so, Boada turned to look at me. The rain is letting up slightly. I can still hear the dripping from the trees, leaf to the dead leaves lining the forest floor. It'll probably continue on and off all night. Occasionally, I think I hear a kind of thrashing in one of the oaks near the barn, but then the sound turns into the falling of the rain. Mildew higher on the walls of this place. Glad my books are on shelves off the ground. So damp in here, my envelopes are ruined, glue moistened, sealing them all shut. Stamps I've kept in my wallet are stuck to the dollar bills. At night, my sheets are clammy and cold, but each morning I wake up sweating. Finished The Amber Witch, really fine. Would that all lives had such happy endings. June 22. Rain continued through most of the morning. After the Poroths returned from church, looking with their black clothes and large old-fashioned black umbrellas like figures out of Edward Gorey, I passed some time indoors by helping them prepare strips of molding for their upstairs study. We worked in the tool shed, one of the old wooden outbuildings. I measured, Sarr sawed, Deborah sanded. All in all, hardly felt useful, but I was in the mood for some companionship. While they were busy, I stood staring out the window. The day had finally cleared. There's a narrow cement walk running from the shed to the main house, and two of the kittens, Felix, I think, and Minnie, the little orange one, were crouched in the middle of it, drying themselves in the late afternoon sun. Suddenly, Boada appeared around the side of the house and began slinking along the walk in our direction, tail swishing from side to side. When she neared the kittens, she gave a snarl. I could see her mouth working, and they leapt to their feet, bristling, and ran off into the grass. Called this to the Poroth's attention. They said, in effect, "Yes, we know she's always been nasty to the kittens, probably because she never had any of her own. And besides, she's getting older." When I turned back to the window, Boada was gone. Asked the Poroths if they didn't think she'd gotten meaner lately. Realized that, in speaking, I'd unconsciously dropped my voice, as if someone might be listening through the chinks in the floorboards. Deborah conceded that yes, the cat is behaving worse these days toward the others, and not just toward the kittens as before. Butch, the adult orange male, seems particularly afraid of her. Later, good Sunday dinner. Chicken breast, rice, slice of rhubarb pie, and came back here. Yet, now am a little irritated at the Poroths. They claim they never come into these rooms, respect privacy of a tenant, etc., etc. But one of them must have been in here, because I've just noticed my can of insect spray is missing. I don't mind their borrowing it, but I like to have it by my bed on nights like this. Went over the room looking for spiders just in case. Had a fat copy of American Scholar in my hand to crush them, only thing it's good for, but found nothing. Tried to read some Walden as a break from all the horror stuff, but found my eyes too irritated, watery. Kept scratching them as I write this. Nose pretty clogged too. Damned allergies worse tonight. Probably it's the dampness. Expect I'll have trouble getting to sleep. June 24. Writing this in the morning. Slept very late, as noise from outside kept me up last night. Come to think of it, the Poroth's praying was unusually loud as well, but that wasn't what bothered me. I'd been in the middle of doing this journal, some notes on De la Mer, when it came. I immediately stopped writing and shut off the light. At first, it sounded like something in the woods near my room. An animal? A child? I couldn't tell, but smaller than a man, shuffling through the dead leaves, kicking them around as if it didn't care who heard it. There was a snapping of branches, and every so often, a silence and then a bump, as if it were hopping over fallen logs. I stood in the dark listening to it, then crept to the window and looked out. Thought I noticed some bushes moving, back there in the undergrowth, but it may have been the wind. The sound grew farther away. Whatever it was must have been walking directly out into the deepest part of the woods, where the ground gets swampy and treacherous, because very faintly, I could hear the sucking sounds of feet slogging through the mud. I stood by the window for almost an hour, occasionally hearing what I thought were movements off there in the swamp, but finally, all was quiet, except for the crickets and the frogs. I had no intention of going out there with my flashlight in search of the intruder. That's only for guys in the movies. And I wondered if I should call Sarr. But by this time, the noise had stopped, and whatever it was had obviously moved on. Besides, I figured he'd have been angry if I'd awakened him and Deborah just because some stray dog had wandered near the farm. I recalled how annoyed he'd been earlier when, maybe not all that tactfully, I'd asked him what he'd done with my bug spray. We'll walk to town later and pick up a new one. Clearly, I've misplaced the old. I went over to the windows on the other side and watched the moonlight on the barn for a while. My nose probably looked cross-hatched from pressing against the screen. In contrast to the woods, the grass looked peaceful under the full moon. Then I lay in bed, but had a hard time falling asleep. Just as I was getting relaxed, the sounds started again. High-pitched wails and caterwauls from deep within the woods. Even after thinking about it a lot today, I still don't know whether the noise was human or animal. There were no actual words, of that I'm certain, but nevertheless there was the impression of singing. In a crazy, tuneless kind of way, the sound seemed to carry the same solemn rhythm as the Poroth's prayers earlier that night. The noise only lasted for a minute or two, but I lay awake till the sky began to get lighter. Probably should have read a little more De la Mer, but was reluctant to turn on the lamp. After I returned from town, the farm looked very lonely. Wish they had a library in Gilead with more than religious tracts, or a stand that sold the Times. Truth is, though, after a week or two, you no longer miss it. At dinner, pork chops, homegrown string beans, and pudding, quite good, mentioned the noise of last night. Sarr acted very concerned and went to his room to look up something in one of his books. Deborah and I discussed the matter at some length, and she suggested that the shuffling sounds weren't necessarily related to the wailing. The former were almost definitely those of a dog, dozens in the area, and they love to prowl around at night, exploring, hunting coons. And as for the wailing, well, it's hard to say. She thinks it may have been an owl or whippoorwill, while I suspect it may have been that same stray dog. I've heard the howls of wolves, and I've heard hounds baying at the moon, and both have that same element of, I suppose, worship in them that these did. Sarr came back downstairs and said he couldn't find what he'd been looking for. Said that when he'd moved into this farm, he'd had, quote, a fit of piety, unquote, and had burned a lot of old books he'd found in the attic. Now he wishes he hadn't. Looked up something on my own after leaving the Poroths. Field Guide to Mammals lists both red and gray foxes and, believe it or not, coyotes as surviving here in New Jersey. No wolves left, though, but the guide might be wrong. Then, on a silly impulse, opened another reference book, Barbara Byfield's Glass Harmonica. Sure enough, my hunch was right. Looked up June 23rd, and it said, St. John's Eve, Sabbats likely. I'll stick to the natural explanation. Still, I'm glad Mrs. Byfield lists nothing for tonight. I'd like to get some sleep. There is, of course, a beautiful full moon. Werewolf weather, as Maria Ouspenskaya might have said. But then, there are no wolves left in New Jersey. Which reminds me, really must read some Marryat and Endor, but only after Northanger Abbey. The course always comes first. June 25. Slept all morning, and in the afternoon followed the road in the opposite direction from Gilead, seeking anything of interest. But the road just gets muddier and muddier till it disappears altogether by the ruins of an old homestead. Rocks and cement covered with moss. And it looked so much like poison ivy around there that I didn't want to risk tramping through. Overheated from walk. Am I getting out of shape? Or is it just the hot weather? Took a cold shower. When I opened the bathroom door, I accidentally let Boada out. I'd wondered why the chair was propped against it. She raced into the kitchen, pushed open the screen door by herself, and I had no chance to catch her. Wouldn't have attempted to anyway. Her claws are wicked. I apologized later when Deborah came in from the fields. She said Boada had become vicious toward the other cats and that Sarr had confined her to the bathroom as punishment. The first time he'd shut her in there, Deborah said, the cat had gotten out. Apparently, she's smart enough to turn the doorknob by swatting at it a few times, hence the chair. Sarr came in carrying Boada, both obviously out of temper. He'd seen a streak of orange running through the field toward him, followed by a gray blur. Butch had stopped at his feet and Boada had pounced on him, but before she could do any damage, Sarr had grabbed her around the neck and carried her back here. He'd been bitten once and scratched a lot on his hands, but not badly. Maybe the cat still likes him best. He threw her back in the bathroom and shoved the chair against the door, then sat down and asked Deborah to join him in some silent prayer. I thumbed uneasily through a religious magazine till they were done, and we sat down to dinner. I apologized again, but he said he wasn't mad at me, that the devil had gotten into his cat. It was obvious he meant that quite literally. During dinner, omelet, the hens have been laying well, we heard a grating sound from the bathroom, and Sarr ran in to find the cat almost out the window. Somehow, she must have been strong enough to slide the sash up partway. She seemed so placid, though, when Sarr pulled her down from the sill, he'd been expecting another fight, that he let her out into the kitchen. At this, she simply curled up near the stove and went to sleep. I guess she'd worked off her rage for the day. Still, the other cats gave her a wide berth. Watched a couple of hours of television with the Poroths. They may have gone to college, but the shows they find interesting. God, I'm ashamed of myself for sitting there like a cretin in front of that box. I won't even mention what we watched, lest history record the true level of my taste. And yet, I find that the TV draws us closer, as if we were having an adventure together. Shared experience, really. Like knowing the same people or going to the same school. But there's duplicity in those Poroths, and I don't just mean religious hypocrisy either. Came out here after watching the news, and though I hate to accuse anyone of spying on me, there's no doubt that Sarr or Deborah has been inside this room today. I began tonight's entry with great irritation because I found my desk in disarray. This journal wasn't even put back in the right drawer. I keep all my pens on one side, all my pencils on another, ink and erasers in the middle, etc. And when I sat down tonight, I saw that everything was out of place. Thank God I hadn't included anything too personal in here. What I assume happened was that Deborah came in to wash the mildew off the walls. She's mentioned doing so several times, and she knew I'd be out walking part of the day. and got sidetracked into reading this, thinking it must be some kind of secret diary. I'm sure she was disappointed to find that it's merely a literary journal with nothing about her in it. What bugs me is the difficulty of broaching the subject. I can't just walk in and charge Deborah with being a sneak. Sarr is moody enough as it is, and even if I hint at someone messing up my desk, they'll know what I mean and perhaps get angry. Whenever possible, I prefer to avoid unpleasantness. I guess the best thing to do is simply hide this book under my mattress from now on and say nothing. If it happens again, though, I'll definitely move out of here. I've been reading some more Northanger Abbey. Really quite witty, as all her stuff is, but it's obvious the mock Gothic bit isn't central to the story. I'd thought it was going to be a real parody. Love stories always tend to bore me, and normally I'd be asleep right now, but my damned nose is so clogged tonight that it's hard to breathe when I lie back. Usually, being out here clears it up. I've used this goddamned inhaler a dozen times in the past hour, but within a few minutes I sneeze and I have to use it again. Wish Deborah had gotten around to cleaning off the mildew instead of wasting her time searching in here for true confessions and deep dark secrets. I think I hear something moving outside. Best to shut off my light. June 30. Slept late. Read some Shirley Jackson stories over breakfast, but got so turned off at her view of humanity that I switched to old Aleister Crowley, who at least keeps a sunny disposition. For her, people in the country are callous and vicious. Those in the city are callous and vicious. Husbands are, of course, callous and vicious, and children are little sadists. The only ones with feelings are her put-upon middle-aged heroines, with whom she obviously identifies. Good thing she writes so well, otherwise the stories wouldn't sting so. Inspired by Crowley, walked back to the pool in the woods. Had visions of climbing a tree, swinging on vines, anything to commemorate his exploits. Saw something dead floating in the center of the pool and ran back to the farm. Copperhead? Caterpillar? It had somehow opened up. From far off could hear the echo of Sarr's axe and joined him chopping steaks for tomatoes. He told me Boada hadn't come home last night and no sign of her this morning. Good riddance as far as I'm concerned. Helped him chop some steaks while he was busy peeling off bark. That axe can get heavy fast. My arm hurt after 3 lousy steaks, and Sarr had already chopped 15 or 16. Must start exercising. But I'll wait till my arm's less tired. July 2. Unpleasant day. 2 a.m. now and still can't relax. Sarr woke me up this morning, stood at my window calling, "Jeremy, Jeremy," over and over, very quietly. He had something in his hand which, through the screen, I first took for a farm implement. Then I saw it was a rifle. He said he wanted my help. For what? I asked. A burial. Last night, after he and Deborah had gone to bed, they'd heard the kitchen door open and someone enter the house. They both assumed it was me, come to use the bathroom, but then they heard the cats screaming. Sarr ran down and switched on the light in time to see Boada on top of Butch, claws in his side, fangs buried in his neck. From the way he described it, sounds almost sexual in reverse. Butch had stopped struggling, and Minnie, the orange kitten, was already dead. The door was partly open, and when Boada saw Sarr, she ran out. Sarr and Deborah hadn't followed her. They'd spent the night praying over the bodies of Minnie and Butch. I thought I'd heard their voices late last night, but that's all I heard, probably because I'd been playing my radio, something I rarely do. You can't hear noises from the woods when it's on. Poroths took deaths the way they'd take the death of a child. Regular little funeral service over by the unused pasture. Hard to say if Sarr and Deborah were dressed in mourning, since that's the way they always dress. Must admit, I didn't feel particularly involved. My allergies never permitted me to take much interest in the cats, though I'm fond of Felix. But I tried to act concerned. When Sarr asked, appropriately, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician here?" Jeremiah 8:22, I nodded gravely. Read passages out of Deborah's Bible. Sarr seemed to know them all by heart. Said amen when they did, knelt when they knelt, and tried to comfort Deborah when she cried. Asked her if cats could go to heaven, received a tearful, "Of course." But Sarr added that Buada would burn in hell. What concerned me, apparently a lot more than it did either of them, was how the damned thing could get into the house. Sarr gave me this stupid, earnest answer. She was always a smart cat. Like an outlaw's mother, still proud of her baby. Yet he and I looked all over the land for her so he could kill her. Barns, tool shed, old stables, garbage dump, etc. He called her and pleaded with her, swore to me she hadn't always been like this. We could hardly check every tree on the farm, unfortunately, and the woods are a perfect hiding place, even for animals far larger than a cat. So, naturally, we found no trace of her. We did try, though. We even walked up the road as far as the ruined homestead. But for all that, we could have stayed much closer to home. We returned for dinner, and I stopped at my room to change clothes. My door was open. Nothing inside was ruined. Everything was in its place, everything as it should be, except the bed. The sheets were in tatters right down to the mattress, and the pillow had been ripped to shreds. Feathers were all over the floor. There were even claw marks on my blanket. At dinner, the Poroths demanded they be allowed to pay for the damage. Nonsense, I said. They have enough to worry about. And Sarr suggested I sleep downstairs in their living room. No need for that, I told him. I've got lots more sheets. But he said no, he didn't mean that. He meant for my own protection. He believes the thing is particularly inimical, for some reason, toward me. It seemed so absurd at the time. I mean, nothing but a big fat gray cat. But now, sitting out here, a few feathers still scattered on the floor around my bed, I wish I were back inside the house. I did give in to Sarr when he insisted I take his axe with me, but what I'd rather have is simply a room without windows. I don't think I want to go to sleep tonight, which is one reason I'm continuing to write this. Intend to sit up all night on my new bed sheets, my back against the Poroth's pillow, leaning against the wall behind me, the axe beside me on the bed, this journal on my lap. The thing is, I'm rather tired out from all the walking I did today. Not used to that much exercise. I'm pathetically aware of every sound. Every few minutes, some snapping of a branch or rustling of leaves makes me jump. Thou art my hope in the day of evil. At least, that's what the man said. July 3. Woke up this morning with the journal and the axe cradled in my arms. What awakened me was the trouble I had breathing, nose all clogged, gasping for breath. Down the center of one of my screens, facing the woods, was a huge slash. July 15. Pleasant day, St. Swithin's Day, and yet my birthday. 30 years old, lordy, lordy, lordy. Today I am a man. First dull thoughts on waking. Damnation. 30 today. But another voice inside me, smaller but more sensible, spat contemptuously at such an artificial way of charting one's life. Don't give it another thought. it said. "You've still got plenty of time to fool around." Advice I took to heart. Weather today? Actually somewhat nasty, and thus the weather for the next 40 days, since "if rain on St. Swithin's Day, forsooth, no summer drouth," or something like that. My birthday predicts the weather. It's even mentioned in the glass harmonica. As one must, took a critical self-assessment. First area for improvement, flabby body. Second, less bookish, perhaps? Nonsense. I'm satisfied with the progress I've made. And seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not. Jeremiah 45:5. So I simply did what I remembered from the RCAF exercise series and got good and winded. Flexed my stringy muscles in the shower, certain I'll be a human dynamo by the end of the summer. Simply a matter of willpower. Was so ambitious I trimmed the ivy around my windows again. It's begun to block the light, and someday I may not be able to get out the door. Read Ruthven Todd's Lost Traveler, merely the narrative of a dream turned to nightmare and illogical as hell. Wish, too, there'd been more than merely a few hints of sex. On the whole, rather unpleasant. That gruesome ending is so inevitable. Took me much of the afternoon. Then came upon an incredible essay by Lafcadio Hearn, something entitled Gaki, detailing the curious Japanese belief that insects are really demons or the ghosts of evil men. Uncomfortably convincing. Dinner late because Deborah, bless her, was baking me a cake. Had time to walk into town and phone parents. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Both voiced first worry. Mustn't I be getting bored out here? Assured them I still had plenty of books and did not grow tired of reading. But it's so secluded out there, Mom said. Don't you get lonely? She hadn't reckoned on the inner resources of a man of 30. Was tempted to quote Walden. Why should I feel lonely? Is not our planet in the Milky Way? But refrained. How can I get lonely, I asked, when there's still so much to read? Besides, there are the Poroths to talk to. Then the kicker. Dad wanted to know about the cat. Last time I'd spoken to them, it had sounded like a very real danger. Are you still sleeping inside the farmhouse, I hope? No, I told him. Really, I only had to do that for a few days while the thing was prowling around at night. Yes, it had killed some chickens. A hen every night, in fact. But there'd been only 4 of them, and then it stopped. We haven't heard a sign of it in more than a week. I didn't tell him that it had left the hens uneaten, dead in the nest. No need to upset him further. But what it did to your sheets, he went on. If you'd been sleeping, such savagery. Yes, that was unfortunate, but there's been no trouble since, honest. It was only an animal, after all, just a house cat gone a little wild. It posed the same kind of threat as, I was going to say logically, a wild cat, but for Mom said, a nasty little dog, like Mrs. Miller's bull terrier. Besides, it's probably miles and miles away by now. Or dead. They offered to drive out with packages of food, magazines, a portable TV, but I made it clear I needed nothing. Getting too fat, actually. Still light when I got back. Deborah had finished the cake. Sarr brought up some wine from the cellar, and we had a nice little celebration. The 2 of them being over 30, they were happy to welcome me to the fold. It's nice out here. The wine has relaxed me, and I keep yawning. It was good to talk to Mom and Dad again. Just as long as I don't dream of the lost traveler, I'll be content. And happier still if I don't dream at all. July 30. Well, Buada is dead. This time for sure. We'll bury her tomorrow. Deborah was hurt. Just how badly I can't say, but she managed to fight Buada off. Tough woman, though she seems a little shaken, and with good reason. It happened this way. Sarr and I were in the tool shed after dinner, building more shelves for the upstairs study. Though the fireflies were out, there was still a little daylight left. Deborah had gone up to bed after doing the dishes. She's been tired a lot lately, falls asleep early every night when they're watching TV. He thinks it may be something in the well water. It had begun to get dark, but we were still working. Sarr dropped a box of nails, and while we were picking them up, he thought he heard a scream. Since I hadn't heard anything, he shrugged and was about to start sawing again when, fortunately, he changed his mind and ran off to the house. I followed him as far as the back porch, not sure whether to go upstairs, until I heard him pounding on their bedroom door and calling Deborah's name. As I ran up the stairs, I heard her say, "Wait, don't come in. I'll unlock the door soon." Her voice was extremely hoarse, practically a croaking. We heard her rummaging in the closet, finding her bathrobe, I suppose, and then she opened the door. She looked absolutely white. Her long hair was in tangles and her robe buttoned incorrectly. Around her neck she had wrapped a towel, but we could see patches of blood soaking through it. Sarr helped her over to the bed, shouting at me to bring up some bandages from the bathroom. When I returned, Deborah was lying in bed, still pressing the towel to her throat. I asked Sarr what had happened. It almost looked as if the woman had tried suicide. He didn't say anything, just pointed to the floor on the other side of the bed. I stepped around for a look. A crumpled gray shape was lying there, half covered by the bedclothes. It was Bwada, a wicked-looking wound in her side. On the floor next to her lay one of the Poroth's old black umbrellas, the thing Deborah had used to kill her. She told us she'd been asleep when she felt something crawl heavily over her face. It had been like a bad dream. She tried to sit up, and suddenly Bwada was at her throat, digging in. Luckily, she'd had the strength to tear the animal off and dash to the closet, where the first weapon at hand was the umbrella. Just as the cat sprang at her again, Deborah said, she'd raised the weapon and lunged. Amazing. How many women, I wonder, would have had such presence of mind? The rest sounds incredible to me, but it's probably the sort of crazy thing that happens in moments like this. Somehow, the cat had impaled itself on the umbrella. Her voice, as she spoke, was barely more than a whisper. Sarr had to persuade her to remove the towel from her throat. She kept protesting that she wasn't hurt that badly, that the towel had stopped the bleeding. Sure enough, when Sarr finally lifted the cloth from her neck, the wounds proved relatively small, the slash marks already clotting. Thank God that thing didn't really get its teeth in. My guess, only a guess, is that it had been weakened from days of roaming around the woods. It was obviously incapable of feeding itself adequately, as I think was proved by its failure to eat the hens it killed. While Sarr dressed Deborah's wounds, I pulled back the bedclothes and took a closer look at the animal's body. The fur was matted and patchy. Odd that an umbrella could make a puncture like that, ringed by flaps of skin, the flesh seeming to push outward. Deborah must have had the extraordinary good luck to have jabbed the animal precisely in its old wound, which had reopened. Naturally, I didn't mention this to Sarr. He made dinner for us tonight. Soup, actually, because he thought that was best for Deborah. Her voice sounded so bad he told her not to strain it anymore by talking, at which she nodded and smiled. We both had to help her downstairs, as she was clearly weak from shock. In the morning, Sarr will go and get the doctor. He'll have to examine the cat, too, to check for rabies, so we put the body in the freezer to preserve it as well as possible. Afterward, we'll bury it. Deborah seemed okay when I left. Sarr was reading through some home medical guides, and she was just lying on the living room couch, gazing at her husband with a look of purest gratitude, not moving, not saying anything, not even blinking. I feel quite relieved. God knows how many nights I've lain here thinking every sound I heard was Bwada. I'll feel more relieved, of course, when that demon's safely underground. But I think I can say, at the risk of being melodramatic, that the reign of terror is over. I'm still a little hungry. I'm used to more than soup for dinner. These daily push-ups burn up energy. I'll probably dream of hamburgers and chocolate layer cakes. July 31. The doctor collected scrapings from Bwada's teeth and scolded us for doing a poor job of preserving the body. Said storing it in the freezer was a sensible idea, but that we should have done so sooner, since it was already decomposing. The dampness, I imagine, must act fast on dead flesh. He pronounced Deborah in excellent condition. The marks on her throat are, remarkably, almost healed, but he said her reflexes seemed a little off. Sarr invited him to stay for the burial, but he declined, and quite emphatically at that. He's not a member of their order, doesn't live in the area, and apparently doesn't get along too well with the people of Gilead, most of whom mistrust modern science. Not that the old geezer sounded very representative of modern science. When I asked him for some good exercises, he recommended chopping wood and running down deer. Standing under the heavy clouds, Sarr looked like a revivalist minister. His sermon was from Jeremiah 22:19. He shall be buried with the burial of an ass. The burial took place far from the graves of Bwada's 2 victims and closer to the woods. We sang one song, Deborah just mouthing the words, still mustn't strain throat muscles. Sarr solemnly asked the Lord to look mercifully upon all his creatures, and I muttered an amen. Then we walked back to the house, Deborah leaning on Sarr's arm. She's still somewhat stiff. It was gray the rest of the day, and I sat in my room reading The King in Yellow, or rather, Chambers' collection of the same name. One look at the real book, according to Chambers, and I might not live to see the morrow, at least through the eyes of a sane man. That single gimmick, masterful, I admit, seems to be his sole inspiration. I was disappointed that dinner was again made by Sarr. Deborah was upstairs resting, he said. He sounded concerned, felt there were things wrong with her the doctor had overlooked. We ate our meal in silence, and I came back here immediately after washing the dishes. Feel very drowsy and, for some reason, also rather depressed. It may be the gloomy weather. We are, after all, just animals, more affected by the sun and the seasons than we care to admit. More likely, it was the absence of Deborah tonight. Hope she feels better soon. Note: the freezer still smells of the cat's body. Opened it tonight and got a strong whiff of decay. August 1. Writing this breaking habit in early morning. Went to bed last night just after finishing the entry above, but was awakened around 2 by sounds coming from the woods. Wailing, deeper than before, followed by a low, guttural monologue. No words, at least that I could distinguish, if toads could talk. For some reason, I fell asleep before the sounds ended, so I don't know what followed. Could very well have been an owl of some kind, and later a large bullfrog. But I quote, without comment, from The Glass Harmonica. July 31, Lammas Eve, Sabbats likely. Little energy to write tonight, and even less to write about. Come to think of it, I slept most of the day, woke up at 11, later took an afternoon nap. Alas, senile at 30. Too tired to shave and haven't had the energy to clean this place either. Thinking about work is easier than doing it. The ivy's beginning to cover the windows again, and the mildew's been climbing steadily up the walls. It's like a dark green band that keeps widening. Soon it'll reach my books. Speaking of which, opened M.R. James at lunch today. Ghost stories of an antiquary, and a silverfish slithered out. Omen? Played a little game with myself this evening. I just had one hell of a shock. While writing the above, I heard a soft tapping, like nervous fingers drumming on a table, and discovered an enormous spider, biggest of the summer, crawling only inches from my ankle. It must have been living behind this desk. When you can hear a spider walk across the floor, you know it's time to keep your socks on. Thank God for insecticide. Oh yeah, that game. The what if game. I probably play it too often. Vain attempt to enlarge realm of the possible? Heighten my own sensitivity? Or merely work myself into an icy sweat? I pose unpleasant questions for myself and consider the consequences. E.g., what if this glorified chicken coop is sinking into quicksand? Wouldn't be at all surprised. What if the Poroths are tired of me? What if I woke up inside my own coffin? What if I never see New York again? What if some horror stories aren't really fiction? If Mackin sometimes told the truth? If there are white people, malevolent little faces peering out of the moonlight, whispers in the grass, poisonous things in the woods, perfect hate and evil in the world? Enough of this foolishness. Time for bed. August 9. Read some Hawthorne in the morning and, over lunch, reread this week's Hunterdon County Democrat for the dozenth time. Sarr and Deborah were working somewhere in the fields, and I felt I ought to get some physical activity myself. But the thought of starting my exercises again after more than a week's laziness just seemed too unpleasant. I took a walk down the road, but only as far as a smashed-up cement culvert half buried in the woods. I was bored, but Gilead just seemed too far away. Was going to cut the ivy surrounding my windows when I got back, but decided the place looks more artistic covered in vines. Rationalization? Chatted with Poroths about politics, the world situation, a little cosmology, blah blah blah. Dinner wasn't very good, probably because I'd been looking forward to it all day. The lamb was underdone and the beans were cold. Still, I'm always the gentleman and was almost pleased when Deborah agreed to my offer to do the dishes. I've been doing them a lot lately. I didn't have much interest in reading tonight and would have been up for some television, but Sarr's recently gotten into one of his religious kicks and began mumbling prayers to himself immediately after dinner. Deborah, more human, wanted to watch the TV news. She seems to have an insatiable curiosity about world events, yet she claims the isolation here appeals to her. Absorbed in his chanting, Sarr made me uncomfortable. I didn't like his face, and so, after doing the dishes, I left. I've been listening to the radio for the last hour or so. I recall days when I'd have gotten uptight at having wasted an hour, but out here I've lost all track of time. Feel adrift. A little disconcerting, but healthy, I'm sure. Shut off the radio a moment ago and now realize my room is filled with crickets. Up close, their sound is hardly pleasant. Cross between a radiator and a tea kettle, very shrill. They'd been sounding off all night, but I'd thought it was interference on the radio. Now I notice them. They're all over the room. A couple of dozen, I should think. Hate to kill them, really. They're one of the few insects I can stand, along with ladybugs and fireflies. But they make such a racket. Wonder how they got in. August 14. Played with Felix all morning, mainly watching him chase insects, climb trees, doze in the sun. A spectator sport. After lunch, went back to my room to look up something in Lovecraft and discovered my books were out of order. Saki, for example, had been filed under S, whereas, whether out of fastidiousness or pedantry, I've always preferred to file him as Monroe. This is definitely one of the Poroths' doing. I'm pissed they didn't mention coming in here, but also a little surprised they'd have any interest in this stuff. Arranged them correctly again, then sat down to reread Lovecraft's essay on supernatural horror in literature. It upsets me to see how little I've actually read, how far I still have to go. So many obscure authors, so many books I've never come across. Left me feeling depressed and tired, so I took a nap for the rest of the afternoon. Over dinner, vegetable omelet, rather tasteless, Deborah continued to question us on current events. It's getting to be like junior high school with daily newspaper quizzes. Don't know how she got started on this or why the sudden interest, but it obviously annoys the hell out of Sarr. Sarr used to be a sucker for her little girl pleadings. I remember how he used to carry her upstairs, becoming pathetically tender the moment she'd say, "Oh, honey, I'm so tired." But now he just becomes angry. Often, he goes off morose and alone to pray, and the only time he laughs is when he watches television. Tonight, thank God, he was in a mood to forego the prayers, and so, after dinner, we all watched a lot of offensively ignorant programs. I was disturbed to find myself laughing along with the canned laughter, but I have to admit the TV helps us get along better together. Came back here after the news. Not very tired, having slept so much of the afternoon, so began to read John Christopher's The Possessors. But good though it was, my mind began to wander to all the books I haven't yet read, and I got so depressed I turned on the radio. Find it takes my mind off things. August 19. Slept long into the morning, then walked down to the brook, scratching groggily. Deborah was kneeling by the water, lost, it seemed, in daydream, and I was embarrassed because I'd come upon her talking to herself. We exchanged a few insincere words, and she went back toward the house. Sat by some rocks, throwing blades of grass into the water. The sun on my head felt almost painful, as if my brain were growing too large for my skull. I turned and looked at the farmhouse. In the distance, it looked like a picture at the other end of a large room, the grass for a carpet, the ceiling the sky. Deborah was stroking a cat, then seemed to grow angry when it struggled from her arms. I could hear the screen door slam as she went into the kitchen, but the sound reached me so long after the visual image that the whole scene struck me as, somehow, fake. I gazed up at the maples behind me, and they seemed trees out of a cheap postcard, the kind in which paint is thinly dabbed over a black and white photo. If you look closely, you can see that the green in the trees is not merely in the leaves, but rather floats as a vapor over leaves, branches, parts of the sky. The trees behind me seemed the productions of a poor painter, the color and shape not quite meshing. Parts of the sky were green, and pieces of the green seemed to float away from my vision. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't follow them. Far down the stream, I could see something small and kicking, a black beetle, legs in the air, borne swiftly along in the current. Then it was gone. Thumbed through the Bible while I ate my lunch, mostly cookies. By late afternoon, I was playing word games while I lay on the grass near my room. The shrill twitter of the birds, I would say the birds singing in the sun, and inexorably I'd continue with the sun dying in the moonlight falling on the floor sagging to the cellar filling with water, the water seeping into the ground twisting into smoke. the smoke staining the sky burning in the sun dying in the moonlight falling on the floor. Melancholy progressions that held my mind like a whirlpool. Sarr woke me for dinner. I had dozed off, and my clothes were damp from the grass. As we walked up to the house together, he whispered that, earlier in the day, he'd come upon his wife bending over me, peering into my sleeping face. Her eyes were wide, he said, like Boada's. I said I didn't understand why he was telling me this. Because, he recited in a whisper, gripping my arm, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I recognized that. Jeremiah 17:9. Dinner was especially uncomfortable. The two of them sat picking at their food, occasionally raising their eyes to each other like children in a staring contest. I longed for the conversations of our early days, inconsequential though they must have been, and wondered where things had gone wrong. The meal was dry and unappetizing, but the dessert looked delicious. Chocolate mousse made from an old family recipe. Deborah had served it earlier in the summer and knew that both Sarr and I loved it. This time, however, she gave none to herself, explaining that she had to watch her weight. "Then we'll not eat any!" Sarr shouted, and with that he snatched my dish from in front of me, grabbed his own, and hurled them both against the wall, where they splattered like mud balls. Deborah was very still. She said nothing, just sat there, watching us. Thank heaven she didn't look particularly afraid of this madman, but I was. He may have read my thoughts, because, as I got up from my seat, he said, much more gently, in the soft voice that once had been normal to him, "Sorry, Jeremy. I know you hate scenes. We'll pray for each other, all right?" "Are you okay?" I asked Deborah, with more bravado than I felt. "I'm going out now, but I'll stay if you think you'll need me for anything." She stared at me, smiled slightly, and shook her head. Trying to convey as much meaning as I could, I nodded toward her husband. She shrugged. "Things will work out," she said. I could hear Sarr laughing as I shut the door. When I snapped on the light out here, I took off my shirt and stood in front of the little mirror. It had been nearly a week since I'd showered, and I'd become used to the smell of my body. My hair had wound itself into greasy brown curls, my beard was at least 2 weeks old, and my eyes, well, the eyes that stared back at me looked like those of an old man. The whites were turning yellow like old teeth. I looked at my chest and arms, flabby at 30, and I thought of the frightening alterations in my friend Sarr. I knew I'd have to get out of here. Just glanced at my watch. It's now quite late, 2:30. I've been packing my things. August 20. I woke about an hour ago and continued packing. Lots of books to put away, but I'm just about done. It's not even 9 a.m. yet, much earlier than I normally get up, but I guess the thought of leaving here fills me with energy. The first thing I saw on rising was a garden spider whose body was as big as some of the mice the cats have killed. It was sitting on the ivy that grows over my windowsill, fortunately on the other side of the screen. Apparently, it had had good hunting all summer, preying on the insects that live in the leaves. Concluding that nothing so big and fearsome has a right to live, I held the spray can against the screen and doused the creature with poison. It struggled halfway up the screen, then stopped, arched its legs, and dropped backwards into the ivy. I plan to walk into town this morning and telephone the office in Flemington where I rented my car. If they can have one ready today, I'll hitch there to pick it up. Otherwise, I'll spend tonight here and pick it up tomorrow. I'll be leaving a little early in the season, but the Poroths already have my month's rent, so they shouldn't be too offended. And anyway, how could I be expected to stick around here with all that nonsense going on? Never knowing when my room might be ransacked, having to put up with Sarr's insane suspicions and Deborah's moodiness. Before I go into town, though, I really must shave and shower for the good people of Gilead. I've been sitting inside here waiting for some sign the Poroths are up, but as yet, it's almost 9. I've heard nothing. I wouldn't care to barge in on them while they're having breakfast, or worse, just getting up. So I'll just wait here by the window till I see them. 10 o'clock now, and they still haven't come out. Perhaps they're having a talk. I'll give them half an hour more, then I'm going in. Here, my journal ends. Until today, almost a week later, I have not cared to set down any of the events that followed. But here, in the temporary safety of this hotel room, protected by a heavy brass travel lock I had sent up from the hardware store down the street, watched over by the good people of Flemington, and perhaps by something not good, I can continue my narrative. The first thing I noticed as I approached the house was that the shades were drawn, even in the kitchen. Had they, I wondered, decided to sleep late this morning? Throughout my 30 years, I've come to associate drawn shades with a foul smell. The smell of a sick room, of shamefaced poverty and food gone bad, of people lying too long beneath blankets. But I was not ready for the stench of decay that met me when I opened the kitchen door and stepped into the darkness. Something had died in that room, and not recently. At the moment the smell first hit, 4 little shapes scrambled across the linoleum toward me and out into the daylight. The Poroth's cats. By the other wall, a lump of shadow moved. A pale face caught light penetrating the shades. Sarr's voice, its habitual softness exaggerated to a whisper. "Jeremy, I thought you were still asleep. Can I—" "No, don't turn on the light." He got to his feet, a black form towering against the window. Fiddling nervously with the kitchen door, the tin doorknob, the rubber bands stored around it, the fringe at the bottom of the drawn window shade, I opened it wider and let in more sunlight. It fell on the dark thing at his feet, over which he had been crouching. Deborah, the flesh of her throat torn and wrinkled like the skin of an old apple. Her clothing lay in a heap beside her. She appeared long dead. The eyes were shriveled, sunken into sockets black as a skull's. I think I may have staggered at that moment, because he came toward me. His steady, unblinking gaze looked so sincere, but why was he smiling? "I'll make you understand," he was saying, or something like that. Even now, I feel my face twisting into horror as I try to write of this. "It needed to be done." She tried to kill me," he went on, silencing all questions. "The same thing that possessed Boada possessed her." My hand played behind my back with the bottom of the window shade. "But her throat? That happened long ago. Boada did it. I had nothing to do with that part." Suddenly, his voice rose. "Don't you understand? She tried to stab me with the bread knife." He turned, stooped over, and clumsy in the darkness, began feeling about him on the floor. "Where is that thing?" he was mumbling. I'll show you." As he crossed a beam of sunlight, something gleamed like a silver handle on the back of his shirt. Thinking perhaps to help him search, I pulled gently on the window shade, then released it. It snapped upward like a gunshot, flooding the room with light. From deep within the center of his back protruded the dull wooden haft of the bread knife, buried almost completely but for an inch or two of gleaming steel. He must have heard my intake of breath. That sight chills me even today, the grisly absurdity of the thing. He must have heard me, because immediately he stood, his back to me, and reached up behind himself toward the knife, his arm stretching in vain, his fingers curling around nothing. The blade had been planted in a spot he couldn't reach. He turned towards me and shrugged in embarrassment, a child caught in a foolish error. "Oh yeah," he said, grinning at his own weakness. "I forgot it was there." With an odd jerking movement, he suddenly thrust his face closer, fixing me in a gaze that never wavered, eyes wide as if with candor. "It's easy for us to forget things," he explained. And then, still smiling, eyes still staring into mine, he volunteered that last trivial piece of information. That final message whose words released me from inaction and left me free to dash from the room, to sprint in panic down the road to town, pursued by what had once been the farmer, Sarr Poroth. It serves no purpose here to dwell on my flight down that twisting road, breathing in such deep gasps that I was soon moaning with every breath. How, with my enemy racing behind me, not even winded, his steps never flagging, I veered into the woods. How I finally lost him, perhaps from the inexperience of whatever thing now controlled his body, and was able to make my way back to the road, only to come upon him again as I rounded a bend. His laughter as he followed me, and how it continued long after I had evaded him a second time, and how, after hiding until nightfall in the old cement culvert, I ran the rest of the way in pitch darkness, stumbling in the ruts, torn by vines, nearly blinding myself when I ran into a low branch, until I arrived in Gilead, filthy, exhausted, and nearly incoherent. Suffice it to say that my escape was largely a matter of luck, a physical wreck fleeing something oblivious to pain or fatigue. But beyond mere luck, I had been impelled by an almost ecstatic sense of dread produced by his last words to me, that last communication from an alien face smiling inches from my own, which I chose to take as his final warning. Sometimes we forget to blink. You can read the rest in the newspapers. The Hunterdon County Democrat covered most of the story, though its man wrote it up as merely another lunatic wife-slaying, the result of loneliness, religious mania, and a mysteriously tainted well. Traces of insecticide were found, among other things, in the water. The Somerset Reporter took a different slant, implying that I had been the third member of an erotic triangle and that Sarr had murdered his wife in a fit of jealousy. Needless to say, I was by this time past caring about what was written about me. I was too haunted by visions of that lonely, abandoned farmhouse, the wails of its hungry cats, and by the sight of Deborah's corpse, discovered by the police, protruding from that hastily dug grave beyond the cornfield. Accompanied by state troopers, I returned to my ivy-covered outbuilding. A bread knife had been plunged deep into its door, splintering the wood on the other side. The blood on it was Sarr's. My journal had been hidden under my mattress and so was untouched, but I look at them now, piled in cardboard boxes beside my suitcase. My precious books had been hurled about the room, their bindings slashed. My summer is over, and now I sit inside here all day listening to the radio, waiting for the next report. Sarr, or his corpse, has not been found. One might think the evidence was clear enough to corroborate my story, but I suppose I should have expected the reception it received from the police. They didn't laugh at my theory of possession, not to my face anyway, but they ignored it in obvious embarrassment. Some see a nice young bookworm gone slightly deranged after contact with a murderer. Others believe my story to be the desperate fabrication of an adulterer trying to avoid the blame for Deborah's death. I can understand their reluctance to accept my explanation of the events, for it's one that goes a little beyond the natural, a little beyond the scientific considerations of motive, modus operandi, and fingerprints. But I find it quite unnerving that at least one official, an assistant district attorney, I think, though I'm afraid I'm rather ignorant of these matters, believes I am guilty of murder. There has, of course, been no arrest. Still, I've been given the time-honored admonition against leaving town. The theory proposing my own complicity in the events is, I must admit, rather ingenious, and so carefully worked out that it will surely gain more adherents than my own. This public official is going to try to prove that I killed poor Deborah in a fit of passion, and, immediately afterward, disposed of Sarr. He points out that their marriage had been an observably happy one until I arrived, a disturbing influence from the city. My motive, he says, was simple lust, unrequited to be sure, aggravated by boredom. The heat, the insects, and, most of all, the oppressive loneliness, all constituted an environment alien to any I'd been accustomed to, and all worked to unhinge my reason. I have no cause for fear, however, because this affidavit will certainly establish my innocence. Surely no one can ignore the evidence of my journal, though I can't imagine someone of implacable hostility maintaining that I wrote it not at the farm, but here in the Union Hotel this very week. What galls me is not the suspicions of a few detectives, but the predicament their suspicions place me in. Quite simply, I cannot run away. I am compelled to remain locked up in this room, potential prey to whatever the thing that was Sarr Poroth has now become. The thing that was once a cat, and once a woman, and once... what? A large white moth? A serpent? A shrew-like thing with wicked teeth? A police chief? A president? A boy with eyes of blood that sits beneath my window? Lord, who will believe me? It was that night that started it all. I'm convinced of it now. The night I made those strange signs in the tree. The night the crickets missed a beat. I'm not a philosopher, and I can supply no ready explanation for what has been released into the world. I'm only a poor scholar, a bookworm, and I must content myself with mumbling a few phrases that keep running through my mind. Phrases out of books read long ago, when such abstractions meant, at most, a pleasant shudder. I am haunted by scraps from the myth of Pandora, and by a semantic discussion I once read comparing unnatural and supernatural, and something about a tiny rent in the fabric of the universe, just large enough to let something in, something not of nature and hard to kill, something with its own obscure purpose. Ironically, the police may be right. Perhaps it was my visit to Gilead that brought about the deaths. Perhaps I had a hand in letting loose the force that, to date, has snuffed out the lives of 4 hens, 3 cats, and at least 2 people, but will hardly be content to stop there. I've just checked. He hasn't moved from the steps of the courthouse, and even when I look out my window, the rose spectacles never waver. Who knows where the eyes beneath them point? Who knows if they remember to blink? Lord, this heat is sweltering. My shirt is sticking to my skin, and droplets of sweat are rolling down my face and dripping onto this page, making the ink run. My hand is tired from writing. I think it's time to end this affidavit. If, as I now believe possible, I inadvertently called down evil from the sky and began the events at Poroth Farm, my death will only be fitting. And after my death, many more. We are all, I'm afraid, its destined prey. Please, then, forgive this prophet of doom, old at 30, his last Jeremiad. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved.
Chilling tales for dark nights.